You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land we celebrate music. In this land we celebrate games. In this land we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VGMbassy. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VGMbassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture. Or I may share a part of my culture on a solo show. Welcome back to the VGMbassy, everybody. Today we are going to be doing a solo focus on a overlooked series of games, I think, mostly because these are NES games that are unlicensed. From a North American standpoint, these games were not as widely released, and they were developed and published by Camerica and Codemasters, who were based in the UK, so a lot of these games had much more recognizability in the European sector, and not so much in North America. So, as a North American-centric podcast, we didn't really see these games on the shelves. We're going to be talking about a series of games called the Quattro games, which were released on the NES in the early 90s. These were collections of 4 games on one cartridge. From what little I've studied them, just in passing from including them on previous podcasts, I've always been a really big fan of the music. I've always been a sucker for European NES tunes anyways. As someone who really enjoys demo scene music, this is kind of as close as you can get to that. So I wanted to take a deeper dive and kind of focus a show on the Quattro games releases that were available in North America. When applicable, also, as always, when I research these games, I find little side quests, as it were, with fun information not canon to the show, and where available, I will maybe kind of divert some attention to other console and computer releases related to this. There were 3 Quattro releases in North America: Quattro Sports, Quattro Adventure, and Quattro Arcade. Again, each game cartridge was comprised of 4 different games, for 12 games in total. Different versions of these games were also released on other systems, usually exclusive to the UK, like the Amstrad CPC, the ZX Spectrum. There were also Commodore 64 and Amiga releases, which may have gotten very limited runs in North America. So I want to share mostly music from the NES titles. We're going to go through each of the 12 games and pick a selection or 2 from some of my favorite music from each of these games, talk about them a little bit, talk a little bit about the composers and the technology behind putting 4 games on one cartridge. Speaking of technology, the first 2 cartridges in the Quattro series were released on the Aladdin Deck Enhancer. This was a very unique product at the time. It was a device which you would plug into your Nintendo, and it contains a bypass security circuit chip, a memory control chip, and a graphics chip. So we all know that the NES cartridges also had their own co-processors in them. The MMC5, the MMC3, these were basically chips built into the NES cartridge board, which enhanced the capabilities of what the NES could normally do. Basically, Codemasters created the Aladdin Deck Enhancer so that they could add these 3 chips into their games without having to produce them over and over and over again. So a big reason why in the Super Nintendo era, Nintendo decided not to release Star Fox 2 was because they had to produce a Super FX2 chip for each and every game that came out. So imagine if Nintendo created a Super FX/Super FX2 base cartridge that you could plug into your Super Nintendo and then release Star Fox and Stunt Tracks FX cartridges that you could plug into that Super FX chip. And therefore you have the capability to have a whole lot more Super FX games because you're not having to reproduce that super expensive chip over and over again. That was the concept behind the Aladdin Deck Enhancer. Comerica wanted to save money by producing these 3 chips on this Deck Enhancer, and then they can create a whole bunch of games without those chips in them and sell them, and you can plug it right into the enhancer. So the games themselves would not work plugged directly into the NES control deck. You would need to use the enhancer. It worked pretty well. I mean, there were supposed to be a total of 24 games released for this deck enhancer, but only 7 ended up coming out. I think that had to do with the fact that, the Super Nintendo was on the horizon and people were kind of moving away from the NES by that point, as well as maybe a lack of really high-quality AAA titles. I still think it's a really good concept, though. Anyways, our first Quattro compilation cartridge using this Aladdin Deck Enhancer was called Quattro Sports. This was released in 1991, and it included 4 games: Pro Tennis Simulator, BMX Simulator, Soccer Simulator, and Baseball Pros. There were slight variations of this lineup that appeared on the Amstrad CPC, the Commodore 64, and the ZX Spectrum, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go throughout the show. And again, remember, this is a European developer, so if you think about the Amiga, if you think about the Commodore 64, many of these games had a lot of music up front. You'd have a really awesome title screen tune, and the music during the games would either be non-existent or much more simple. So we're going to be hearing a lot of title themes, a decent amount of high score name entry tunes, non-gameplay stuff in this show. With that said, we're going to start off with the title theme from Pro Tennis Simulator. This was released on the NES in 1991, composed by Gavin Raeburn. You're going to hear a whole lot of Gavin Raeburn music in this show. Looking forward to sharing it. Let's hit it. Alright, starting the show off with some high-energy tunes. That was Pro Tennis Simulator's title theme, released on the NES as part of the Quattro Sports Collection, composed by Gavin Raeburn. Very bouncy tune. This is going to set the tone for much of the music you're going to be hearing on this show. Lots of very playful, arpeggiated notes, lots of fun, upbeat percussion sections. This one kind of uniquely has a sampled bass, which reminds me a lot of the Sunsoft bass stuff, which is kind of unique. You don't really hear that outside of the Sunsoft games. So I appreciate that Raeburn was able to throw that in for this song. I guess this tune is like the one redeeming quality of this game. The game itself is pretty simple. You see both sides of the tennis court on the screen. It's kind of like from a behind-the-player view, maybe more like a three-quarter top-down view, similar to like if you were looking at it from like a Legend of Zelda perspective. Except the screen does scroll from side to side, but not up and down. And you get two characters. You can play a one-player game or a two-player game. There's no tournaments or anything like that. And you serve the ball, and you basically play a very simple game of tennis. It's really, really finicky. Like, when you serve, you need to hit the ball in a very specific timing, or else you're going to fault. You're going to hit it outside of the box, you're going to hit it outside of the court itself, you're going to hit it into the net, so you really have to get that timing down. When you're returning, it requires very specific button presses as well. You also can't mash the button because your swing is so fast that if you mash the button when the ball gets to you, you can actually swing your arm and hit the ball twice before it goes back to your opponent, which will also fault you. I've never seen a tennis game where you can double hit the ball before. That could have easily been taken care of by the developers. So, not all of these games are going to be huge AAA titles. A, they're unlicensed. B, they're probably putting a quarter of the amount of effort into each of these games to put 4 games on a cartridge. It does seem like, the composers had plenty of time to do the music because they feel very complete and polished. Some of them were ported tunes from other game systems, and some of them were just original tunes. I did say at the beginning of the show that we would take detours where applicable if I found cool music from other versions of these games, and we're going to do that right now. So, Pro Tennis Simulator was also released as a standalone game on the Amiga in 1990, and this soundtrack was composed by Lyndon Sharp, who I wasn't familiar with before I started doing research on this. So let's listen to the title theme from Pro Tennis Simulator from the Amiga. Alright, that was a very different take on the Pro Tennis Simulator theme from Lyndon Sharp on the 1990 Amiga port of the game. Sharp also composed the music for the Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, and Amstrad CPC versions of the game. Pretty much the same compositions, except obviously using those respective game systems' sound chips. Interestingly enough, many of these ports were also designed by Gavin Raeburn. And that's the cool thing about Codemasters, is that a lot of these guys were very multi-talented. Raeburn himself programmed, designed a lot of these games, and wrote the music for them. The same with Lyndon Sharp. Sharp wrote music for lots and lots of Codemasters games from about 1989, starting with Twin Turbo V8, all the way up to Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament in 1996. However, he's got programming and engineering credits, starting with Tilt in 1990, all the way up to Drome Racers, which was a GameCube, PS2, and Xbox game released in 2002. It seems like after 1996 he kind of retired from the music creation scene and got into programming full-time. But there were many, many games where he worked on both programming and sound design. I like this version of Pro Tennis Simulator's theme song because it feels a little more sportsy to me, at least. You know, I remember the old, like, NBC sports themes and stuff, and it feels heroic and like there's an air of pageantry about it. And I feel like this one has that too. Maybe Sharp just had a better handle on what sports music should sound like. As far as the game goes, I'd say this port is graphically definitely better. Much more colorful, much more detailed background. The gameplay is easier, so it seems like it's much more forgiving. Basically, if you get near the ball and hit the button, you'll more or less return a well-placed ball. And you're only going to lose the match if you can't get to the ball in time. Whereas on the NES version, timing was really, really important. You had to get to the ball, and you also had to hit it when it was right in front of you, or else you were going to screw the pooch on it. So between the two versions, I'd say both in terms of music and gameplay, I would choose the Amiga. Not that there aren't tons and tons of better tennis games out there, like the Mario Tennis games and Virtua Tennis, etc., etc. But these are fun little games to visit every once in a while. Again, very similar to the NES version, there's no music during gameplay. You're mainly just listening to the title screen music, a couple of stingers here and there when you win a match, win a tournament, or get a game over, something like that. So we're going to move on to, in my opinion, some of the best music composed on this cartridge, and I've played one, maybe both of these tunes on previous podcasts between Pixel Tunes and guest appearances on other shows, etc., etc. But the music from BMX Simulator, I feel, is absolutely amazing. And we've got two tunes lined up from this game. The first one is going to be the title theme. Again, this was composed by Gavin Raeburn on the NES sound system. Alright, that was the title theme from BMX Simulator, released as part of the Quattro sports cartridge on the NES in 1991, composed by Gavin Raeburn. Love this tune. Love that bass groove, just great energy to this. I get Tim Fallon vibes all over this one, so it's no surprise that I enjoy it. That bass, so crunchy and fun, and those kind of like wailing guitar synth solos. It's just great. It's not a very long loop, but I can really listen to this one over and over and over again. Especially that breakdown where it just gets to the drum beat at the end, and then those tom fills. It's just great stuff. Love it, love it, love it. The game, on the other hand, and this is gonna be maybe more of a common theme throughout most of these, is that the game was not that great. It's a very much top-down view of you and two other BMX bikers on a Ivan Ironman Stewart's off-road, kind of a view of your track. The entire track is on the screen at once, and you are on a bike and you basically have to race around the track against other people, and there are obstacles and slight bumps that don't really seem to affect your bike that much. You have to repeatedly press the A button to kind of pump your bike, and you fall off constantly, anytime you touch a pixel of something that might be a obstacle, you fall off your bike and you flip over the front of the bike, and then you have to wait a second and then get back on and then start all over again. It's really, really frustrating, and it takes forever to turn. So, not very fun. I think I played this on a Pixel Tunes radio ages and ages ago, and I said that it's more like a falling off your BMX simulator than a BMX simulator. That still holds true. I've tried to play this game and get good at it, and, because it feels like something that I would be interested in. I really like racing and vehicle-based games, and just can't do it with this one. It's unfortunate. However, it's got some of the best music I've heard from a UK composer on the NES, so I gotta give it props for that. We're gonna listen to the Initials entry song from BMX Simulator next. Different feel from this one. I think, like I said, I get Tim Fallon vibes from this one. The next one, I hear more like Alberto Jose Gonzalez vibes, much more bouncy. And then when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about Gavin Raeburn, who he is, a little bit about his long and storied career in video games. Yeah, see what I mean? This one's got Gonzalez all over it. Very bouncy, very fun. If you turned off the podcast right now and went about your day, I guarantee you this would stick in your head because it rolls around in mine so very often. And it's just fun. Like when I'm in a good mood, this is when this gets stuck in my head. It's just like the embodiment of positive energy. I love this tune. And I love how different it is from the title screen music and how kind of effortlessly Raeburn can do both genres, kind of a very aggressive rock style, and then immediately roll into this very happy, bouncy kind of track. And you'll hear that a lot from Raeburn as we go throughout the show too, because you gotta be versatile. There are a lot of different genres of games on these compilations, and you need to be able to compose to those genres. Musicianship isn't Raeburn's only talent. He has a history in video games going all the way back to 1986. He created a Commodore 64 game called The Terminator, which is not related to the movies at all, but he did all the artwork, all the programming, and all of the sound and music for it. And from there, man, tons and tons of credits, tons and tons of different roles. Aside from composer, he was in the arts and graphics department, programming and engineering, design, production, business. He had his hands in tons of different aspects of video games. Did programming and engineering on a lot of the Quattro arcade and Quattro adventure games, Psycho Pinball, did design on Quattro sports games, and then started getting into the racing stuff. So Pro Race Driver in 2003, he was a designer, and did some design work on Toka Race Car Driver 3, and Toka Race Driver 2, and Toka Race Driver 3. Production on those as well. In 2007, produced the first Dirt game for Codemasters, as well as Grid the year after that, and Dirt 2 the year after that, and after that became studio head of Playground Games, famous for creating the Forza Horizon games. Now, he was studio head and or studio director on all 5 Forza Horizon games. As of January of this year, he stepped down as head of Playground Games and let one of his associates take over the reins. So I don't know if he's retired from games entirely or whether he's going to go off in his own direction, but hugely successful series of games. Very well designed. So Gavin Raeburn really made a name for himself in the industry, and I think is going to be very influential in terms of how racing games are played going forward. I had a little bit of playtime with Forza Horizon 4. I think it's the only Forza game I've ever played, and it's fun. I played it because it was on Xbox Game Pass, and I ended up sticking with it for quite a long time. So I was really impressed with that game, and I think he's got a lot of talent, both musically and also as a manager of what must have been an extremely large team working on these Forza Horizon games. So we're looking at the very beginning seeds of where an industry veteran started off. Moving on from BMX Simulator, let's take a listen to the third game in our Quattro Sports compilation. We're going to be listening to the title theme from Soccer Simulator, also released by Gavin Raeburn. Alright, that was the title theme from Soccer Simulator, released again on the NES in 1991, composed by Gavin Raeburn. This one's got a unique sound. Very thick, very textured sound. It's like several arpeggios going on at the same time. It's a little overwhelming, I think, at first. On subsequent loops, I tend to be able to process the sound a little bit better, and it sounds a little more musical to me, I guess. I really do like that solo towards the end of the song. Again, you know, little shades of Tim Fallon there. It gets pretty jazzy, and it's got a really nice kind of cadence to it. It's fun. It relies on the arpeggios for the tempo of the song. There's not a lot of percussion in there. I don't think there's really any at all. And it feels, you know, sporty. I don't know how soccer it feels, if soccer has a sound, but it's got a very classic kind of Commodore 64 feel. Fun track. I really like Soccer Simulator as a game as well. This one flows really nicely. Smooth scrolling. The characters are smaller on the screen, but not so small that there's a lack of detail. If I had a game to compare it to in terms of gameplay, I'd probably say something like the original Ice Hockey on the NES. It's fun, it's fast, you know, it's easy to take the ball away from a opposing player, but there's a lot of strategy involved, especially if you're playing another human opponent to score a goal. I've seen some players online really kind of figure out exploits against the computer players and win games like 22-0. So, you know, maybe the AI is pretty easy to fool, but I think as a two-player game, this would be a lot of fun. It's, again, top-down game. You're looking directly down on the players' heads, the pitch is oriented vertically with the goals on the top and bottom of the screen, and it scrolls up and down and left and right. So it's fun. There's a little crowd that cheers whenever you get a score. There's a black bar across the bottom of the screen with your score on it, so it's possible that they kind of limited the gameplay screen so they can focus on the speed and the smoothness of the gameplay to not have to move as many pixels around. All in all, it's a simple game, but it's probably the most fun on this cartridge so far. However, we've got a few more games to go. At least on the NES, there's one more game. This one's called Baseball Pros, the only one to not have the simulator moniker. Is it a baseball simulator? I don't know. Let's find out. We're going to listen to the match theme from this one. Again, composed by Gavin Raeburn. Really dig this one. That was the match theme from Baseball Pros. Again, part of the Quattro Sports compilation released on the NES in 1991. Composed by Gavin Raeburn. Very intricate arpeggio work here. I like how some of them are a little harder than others. There's a segment here where the arps have a very soft attack and kind of raise in volume as they end. And some, great little melody lines, some great percussion there. This feels like a very fully fleshed out song, and it's good that it's very good because you're going to be listening to this a lot. This is called Match Theme because it plays during your normal gameplay. So while you're playing baseball, there's very, very little in the way of sound effects. Anything that you're going to hear is like a little note played on a square channel or a little thump, like if the ball hits the wall or something like that. The music is front and center in terms of sound in this game. This is the tune that plays during like your kind of normal play, like some other baseball games have had before it and after it. The music will change to a slightly more intense tune if the bases are full, or if there's 2 strikes and 2 outs, it's the end of an inning, something like that. High pressure situations, you're going to get a little more amped up song that plays. So this one does get broken up here and there with those situations, but it's fun. It's good. This game is probably the most complex of all of the Quattro Sports titles. Graphics are decent. There's some good animation. The view changes depending on whether you're at bat or whether you're hitting into the crowd. The menus look like they have a lot of thought put into them. You can see the map of the world as you're choosing your different teams, and all the teams have different designs that go along with them and color schemes. They probably could have gotten away with, okay, here's the blue baseball team and the red baseball team, go have fun. But they did try to make it more like a fully fledged baseball game, and I like that about it. So between the music and the gameplay, this is probably the highest quality game on the cartridge, and still kind of pales in comparison to like Baseball Simulator 1.000 or Bases Loaded or anything like that. But when you consider that you probably paid, I don't know, $20-$30 for a cartridge with 4 games on it, it's probably worthwhile, especially if you've got other people to play with. Alright, so before we move on to our next Quattro compilation on the NES, I want to talk a little bit about the UK microcomputer version of Quattro Sports. The games weren't the same selection of 4 games that you found on the NES. So while on the NES you've got your tennis, your BMX, your soccer, and your baseball, there was BMX Simulator, Grand Prix Simulator, Professional Ski Simulator, and Professional Snooker Simulator on the Amstrad CPC, Atari 8-bit, Commodore 64, and ZX Spectrum. Some of these games were also released as standalone titles. Some of them were only available in the collection, and the music was composed by some different individuals. So, Professional Ski Simulator was composed by Stephen Barrett. This was released on the C64 in 1987. We're going to take a listen to the Attract mode, which I found really fun. So, we'll be right back. See, this is why I love doing shows like this, because would I have ever bothered to check out the soundtrack of a game called Professional Ski Simulator for the Commodore 64 if I hadn't been looking into these Quattro sports games? I don't think so, and I never would have happened upon this amazing piece of music composed by Steve Barrett, so you're welcome, I guess. No, this one fits the same tone of, like, what I would consider to be like the title theme from BMX Simulator. It's got a very thick, grindy bass line with a lot of really fun arpeggios over it, a lot of cool little like solos and lead synth line noodles going on. Super long track too. It's like almost 3 minutes long and goes a lot of different places. Basically, you just sit there and let this song play while the high scores and the credits scroll across the screen. Impatient people probably would never hear this entire song if they want to just get right into the game. For me, I would probably just load up the game just to listen to the music, to be honest with you. Steve Barrett was part of the Codemasters team for quite a while. He started with the Commodore 64 port of Super Hang-On in 1987. Looks like he joined up with Codemasters around 1989 with Treasure Island Dizzy, and wrote a whole bunch of music for them in 89. Treasure Island Dizzy, Pub Trivia Simulator, MiG-29 Soviet Fighter, Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, the port of that, and he worked with Codemasters up until 1992. The last credit was Big Nose's American Adventure, again, the Commodore 64 version. He also went by the moniker The Eggman, so thank you, Steve the Eggman Barrett, for your lovely contributions to Commodore 64 music. The game is kind of a mixed bag. Graphically, it's really, really impressive. The ski slopes that you ski down, you look at them kind of head on, so you're looking at your skier from the, I guess if you were like in a helicopter facing the mountain, you would see the skier on the mountain going downwards. But it's like a bitmap graphic. There's no repeating tiles or anything like that. You see like a full like portrait-oriented, almost like hand-painted picture of a mountain, and you ski down it. The controls are sluggish and really difficult to kind of try to get used to. I tried playing it a little myself and like could barely even get through the first gate. I looked up some YouTube video, and there was one video of a skier who was pretty good at getting down the mountain, and all the comments are like, whoa, you were way better at this game than I was, and I owned it for years and years. So probably not a game that a lot of people wanted to play for a long time, but you know, a lot of them were talking about how great the title screen music was and how much fun it was just to listen to that, and they would load up the game just to listen to the music instead of actually playing the game. I did mention a little bit of Dizzy and his games in the credits. Dizzy was kind of like an egg-shaped character. Maybe that's where the Eggman came from in Steve Barrett's nickname. This game, like most of the Dizzy games, were created by the Oliver twins, aka Philip and Andrew Oliver. And they're still making games to this day. They have a decent amount of fame, much more in Europe than in North America, but they've created a ton of fun games loved by everyone on the Commodore 64, the Amiga, Atari ST, etc., as well as, you know, the NES, Super Nintendo, and stuff. So we'll definitely listen to music from more games designed by them as we go throughout the show. We've got one more Quattro Sports game before we move on to our Quattro Adventure. We're going to listen to the title theme from Professional Snooker Simulator. This was released in 1988 as a standalone game on the C64. This was composed by David Whittaker. Fun little old-timey tune I thought I'd throw in. It kind of reminds me of like an Old West saloon or something with a, you know, piano player playing in the corner while dastardly bandits size each other up for a shootout. I don't know, I'm getting a little overzealous with this, but that was the title theme from Professional Snooker Simulator, released in 1988 on the Commodore 64, composed by Dave Whittaker. Dave Whittaker, also a super prolific composer of his era as well. One of my favorite Super Nintendo soundtracks, Firepower 2000, has a David Whittaker soundtrack. I'm not going to spend too much time on this game. It's really simple. Again, top-down view of a pool table, and you pull the cue back, you aim, and you shoot the balls. Very, very simple. One of the cool, unique things that I noticed about this game is that at the top of the screen, you can see a behind the ball view, and it will show you the closest ball that you're going to hit, like what your angle is, like where the ball is lined up to your ball. So if you're familiar with playing pool at all, the angle that you hit the ball at will determine the angle of the ricochet, and so that's a very important part of gameplay. So this kind of helps you line up your shot more so than just your top-down view. Not a lot of other snooker or pool games I've seen have that additional perspective that allows you to line up your shot. So I thought that was a great kind of design choice for this one. The music itself, like I said, very simple, very player piano style. I just felt it was a cool little piece of music that I wouldn't be able to fit into any other kind of show, so I wanted to throw that in there and twirl my wax mustache. All right, so let's move on to our next compilation, Quattro Adventure. It's a collection of 4 platform action video games released for the NES and the Commodore 64 in 1991. It contained Linus Spacehead, Super Robin Hood, Boomerang Kid, and Treasure Island Dizzy. So there we are with those Dizzy games, and we'll get into those at the end of this compilation. But some interesting games here. Much more music on this compilation, simply because we're looking at, adventure platforming games now where different stages will have their own themes and not just necessarily one title theme. So it was nice having a greater breadth of music to select from. I don't think the quality of the music is on par with the Quattro Sports titles, but there's still a lot of fun music to be heard here. We've also got more of a variation in composers as well, an inclusion to Gavin Raeburn. We've also got some music composed by Allister Brimble. And to start off our Quattro Adventure journey, we're going to listen to one of his compositions. So we're going to listen to Stage 5 from Linus Spacehead. Again, this was released on the NES a year later in 1992, composed by Allister Brimble. Alright, that was Stage 5 from Linus Spacehead, composed by Allister Brimble, released on the Quattro Adventure game cartridge on the NES in 1992. This was also an Aladdin deck enhancer release, so you can't play this game physically on your NES unless you have the deck enhancer, or you load up the ROM on an EverDrive or something like that. Fun tune, very long. I don't know, it's called Stage 5 on the soundtrack. You know, obviously there's no official release of this soundtrack, but on the compilation, the NSFE file that I found, it says Stage 5. However, when I play the game, I notice that this music tends to play in almost all of the stages, so I guess maybe I should change it more to like the gameplay theme. I think that makes a little more sense. I'm not a big fan of the way it starts off. It sounds kind of abrasive, but I feel like once the arpeggios kick in, it's much more listenable, and I like that it's kind of dynamic. It has a couple of different movements. It's a lot of fun as well. Like a lot of the other games on these Quattro compilations, the music, when it appears in gameplay, is very much up front, and the sound effects are really simple. I think it was more of a game design culture aspect in the UK, where music was the main thing that you listened to. You know, in Japan and American design games, the sound effects kind of share the space with the soundtracks. And, you know, on the Amiga and the Commodore 64, most of these games, they have the option to either play music or play sound effects. And there wasn't enough channels or memory to really fit both in your gameplay at once. So when game designers were designing games for the NES and were like, oh, we can do both, where do we focus our sound? It seems like they decided to go mostly with the music. You put the music way up front, and the sound effects are kind of like little incidental boops and hints of, you know, static or percussion that occur sporadically throughout the game. Not that I'm complaining. I mean, this music is absolutely incredible. It feels very strange to be playing a game with, especially a game like this, where it's got Mario 3 meets Super Adventure Island gameplay, and not to be hearing sound effects for every single jump and landing and every single bounce that a enemy takes as it's, you know, walking and falling off of cliffs and stuff like that. So again, kind of like a audio design culture shock almost. I could talk about Allister Brimble, but I'd be here for like the next 3 years. Brimble has worked on an absolutely astounding amount of games. He started off with Treasure Island Dizzy on the Amiga back in 1989, and I don't know, man, if you go to his Moby Games page, you just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll through his music credits, and there's got to be at least 100. So I don't even know where to begin. Most recently, and actually I just found this out accidentally, so there was a Neo Geo side-scrolling shmup called Androdunos. It was a Visco-produced game. Really fun. They just licensed Androdunos 2, which came out on Switch and Steam, and I think maybe PS4 or PS5. I was a big fan of the original game, so I decided to check it out. Really enjoyed the music, and so, you know, did some research and tried to find who composed it, and lo and behold, it was Allister Brimble. Very strange to see him composing music for a sequel to a Japanese Neo Geo shmup, but it's really fantastic music, so I'd like to share that on a future episode. Anyways, so that would be his most recent credit. That game just came out about a week or two ago. He worked on Doctor Who, The Edge of Reality, Murder by Numbers, F1 Manager, some games based around the Ice Age movies, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Cartoon Network Battle Crashers, Alien Breed, which was a hugely popular Amiga game series. He did all of the Alien Breed games, Alien Breed 1, 2, and 3. Did some music for Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, the Backyard Sports games, Backyard Baseball. Did some music for Grid, which is not surprising considering he and Gavin Raeburn were contemporaries at Codemasters. Need for Speed Undercover, the DS version of Trackmania, he arranged the music for. So, I mean, I could just keep going on and on and on and on and on. And I would never even scratch the surface. Allister Brimble is a true industry vet, somebody that we don't really talk about enough. I think maybe a composer focus on his music would be a great addition to the VGMbassy shows. So if anyone out there listening would like to join me on that, let me know. Anywho, let's move on to our next game from the Quattro Adventure compilation. We're going to listen to Stage 2 from the interestingly named Super Robin Hood. This one was a Gavin Raeburn composition. Be right back. Super Robin Hood. That was Stage 2 from the game released as part of the Quattro Adventure series in 1992, composed by Gavin Raeburn. This one grabbed my ear immediately because of its fun groove. It has a kind of a reggae cadence, but also kind of like a spooky cave or dungeon vibe as well. The second stage does take place in a dungeon, so I guess that's what they were going for. But I really dug this one. This game actually has a lot of really good music. There's a whole bunch of individual tracks on this for each stage, and really good ending music as well. So maybe some stuff that I'll share in future episodes. Or if you want, go check it out yourself. This game is pretty cool, too. All of the games on Quattro Adventure have a fair amount of polish to them, and this game was released on multiple systems, all developed by the Oliver twins as well. I kind of briefly mentioned them at the beginning with the ski simulator game, but Andrew and Philip Oliver were extremely prolific and very popular British developers. They started their first video game company at the age of 22 with Blitz Games, and this was their first collaboration with Codemasters, and they wrote the game for the NES, the Commodore 64, the Amstrad CPC, and the ZX Spectrum. And all of them are pretty good examples of high-quality games for those systems. They really took the strengths of each system to heart. They made the ZX Spectrum single-screen style game, so there wasn't any scrolling, and that kind of allowed them to create some more intricate graphics and kind of separate the very limited color palette out among different sprites. The Commodore 64 game has slightly more realistic graphics, probably the most janky of all of them, to be honest with you. The Amstrad CPC is extremely colorful, and they kind of shrunk the gameplay screen down a little bit with a big graphic of Robin Hood on the side so they can get some extra performance out of it. The NES version, like any NES game, you know, smooth scrolling, very large levels. This one actually has lots of sound effects over the music, and it plays pretty well for, you know, a game that came with 3 other games on it on this cartridge. It feels like it could be an individual game that you would purchase on the shelf, you know, licensed by Nintendo, and have a pretty fun time. The whole concept is not very extraordinary. You are Robin Hood trying to get back Maid Marian from the evil sheriff of Nottingham, and you have to collect all the treasure along the way so that you can give it to the poor at the end of the game. A very noble cause, if I do say so myself. Next up on our Quattro adventure journey is a game called Boomerang Kid. We're going to listen to the first stage level. This takes place in the forest, and this one's composed by Allister Brimble. That was the forest theme from Boomerang Kid. This was exclusive to the NES. This didn't have any other versions or ports on any other systems. Fun, bouncy soundtrack. It's a very kind of lighthearted game. Allister Brimble did a great job at kind of bringing an upbeat vibe to this. I like the arpeggios in the background is kind of almost like the bass of the song, while the square channels are taking care of the lead instrument. This soundtrack has a bunch of different moods. Boomerang Kid traverses through a number of different locales, mostly like the outback in Australia, but he'll end up in forests and creepy dungeons and stuff as well. They do their best to keep the environment changing and keep things fun. It's more of a puzzle game than an action game. You're called a Boomerang Kid, but you don't actually shoot or throw a boomerang. Every level is a single screen, and you play it platformer style. You basically try to get from where you are to the boomerang that's on the screen. It's spinning around in a corner somewhere. Once you collect it, the level exit opens up, and you have to get there. Along the way, there are koalas and kangaroos, and later on there are skeletons and knights and such. There are levers that you must pull to get moving platforms going, platforms that dissolve under your feet as you walk over them. There's a lot of danger, and you don't have any sort of offensive abilities at all, so you're basically jumping and dodging your way through all of these levels. It's a quick, easy journey. I think the speed run for this game is done in like between 6 and 7 minutes, so there's not a whole lot to it. Again, this was one that was, released exclusively for the NES, so they didn't have to make any adjustments or anything from a game that was previously developed on a different system, so it takes advantage of the NES hardware pretty well. I would recommend it if it was on this cartridge and, you hadn't played it before. Check it out. You might find at least a couple minutes worth of some enjoyment there. Our last game on this compilation is another game from the Oliver Twins. This is Treasure Island Dizzy. The soundtrack was composed by Gavin Raeburn, and we're going to listen to the gameplay theme. You just heard the stage theme from Treasure Island Dizzy, our last game on the Quattro Adventure cartridge. This was composed by Gavin Raeburn. The NES port of this game came out quite a few years after the original games that it was based on. It plays, I guess, the most like the Amiga version, with slightly lower resolution and slightly less dazzling colors. But they seem to be more or less identical, even though that one sports a soundtrack composed by Allister Brimble. I like this tune. I mean, it sounds a bit like the Boomerang Kid tune, in my opinion. It's got the lower arpeggios with the fun square channels going over it. This one feels a little more wistful, a little more adventurous. There's a little more going on in Treasure Island Dizzy than there was in Boomerang Kid. Treasure Island Dizzy kind of presents itself almost like a platforming action game, but has lots of elements of point-and-click adventure, kind of, because you don't really have too many enemies to attack, but you need to pick up certain items around the level, almost kind of Metroidvania style. So you would need to find a snorkel before you can go under the water, you need to find a heavy weight so that you can walk on the bottom of the ocean. Obviously, Treasure Island, so you are on a beach, there's lots of bamboo everywhere, you're walking along, huts that are in palm trees and such, and to find all of the treasure on the island, you need to outfit yourself with different items in order to gain those powers and collect everything. It has some qualities that didn't exist in a lot of other NES games. There are a lot of games like that nowadays, but I think this one was kind of an early example of those prototypical Metroidvania style games. So it's worth checking out. Dizzy is, at least from what I seem to gather, a character that's much more popular in the UK, almost, at least with the older generation who grew up with, the Commodore 64 and the Atari ST, etc. That would be like their Mario or their Sonic. So there are a ton of Dizzy games. There have been recently released Dizzy games. The Oliver twins programmed and wrote nearly all of them, from what I understand. Even as recent as 2015, Philip Oliver found a map that he hand-drew from a game called Wonderland Dizzy, and realized that they had coded an entire game based around Dizzy's character for the NES and never actually compiled it. So in 2015, they released a game for the NES that nobody had ever played before, that had just recently become compiled and playable. And then they found a second Dizzy game called Mystery World Dizzy in their collection and released that in 2016. So it's crazy, man. Like, Dizzy games are still technically coming out. For the ZX Spectrum Next, they created a brand new game starring Dizzy. This was in 2017, based on the world of the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and it's called Wonderful Dizzy. So lots of really cool stuff. Tons and tons of Dizzy games. Some of them are more action-oriented, some of them are more kind of wander around and collect things like Treasure Island Dizzy is. It's not a series of games that I have a lot of experience with, but from what I've seen and from what I've read from comments of people that have grown up with Dizzy, they are a lot of fun. And the Oliver twins are just extremely friendly and very gracious people. They have a huge fan base and a giant pedigree of games under their belts. So, one more track before we leave our Quattro Adventure segment of the show. We're going to listen to the stage music from Treasure Island Dizzy on the Commodore 64. This was released way back in 1989. I really like this one, and it's composed by a composer we haven't heard from yet, going by the name of Matthew Gray. Be right back. The Treasure Island Dizzy theme from the Commodore 64, released in 1989, composed by Matt Gray. A fun, bouncy tune. I think we're getting a lot of fun, bouncy tunes this time around. Very textured and layered, as the SID chip is so fantastic at, and lots of fun, heavy arpeggios. The game itself is kind of a watered-down version of the Amiga game. Well, I guess the Commodore 64 game came first, so everything else would be an enhanced version of this game. And basically the same concept and very similar level design. You are trying to gather up all the treasure on the island, so you are running around getting all of these items to give yourself different abilities to get you into different areas to get your treasure. Matt Gray started off with Yogi Bear in 1987. Also wrote the music for Last Ninja 2 in 1988. That game's well known for its incredible music. While he was with Codemasters, he worked on stuff like BMX Freestyle, Micro Machines in 1991, Platypus he wrote the level 4 music for in 2002, and then he moved on to dialogue editing, starting with Red Faction Guerrilla in 2009, worked on Shin Megami Tensei Persona 2 Innocent Sin, did some dialogue editing for that. His latest game was still in the Red Faction series. That was the remastered version of Red Faction Guerrilla. That was released in 2018. He also worked on the Darksiders games, the Amazing Spider-Man games, Catherine, Saints Row the Third, so lots of AAA releases, very much transitioning from a music guy to a dialogue editor. Alright, so now we're going to move on to Quattro Arcade, our last collection of the show. So this was released a year after in 1992, and by this time the Aladdin Deck Enhancer had already failed, so they released this one as a standalone cart. This one is made up of course, 4 games: CJ's Elephant Antics, Stunt Buggies, F-16 Renegade, and another Dizzy game, Go, Dizzy, Go. Our first track up is the level theme from CJ's Elephant Antics. This was composed by Ashley Hogg, but then arranged by Gavin Raeburn. Ooh, this one's got some heft to it. That was the level theme from CJ's Elephant Antics, composed by Ashley Hogg and arranged for the NES by Gavin Raeburn. I get kind of a sense of foreboding from this one. Not necessarily from like the percussion and the arps in the background, but the lead synth just feels a little bit, I don't know, upset, maybe like a little worried, a little anxious, I think is the best way to describe it. Which is kind of a juxtaposition for the kind of game it is. So, in CJ's Elephant Antics, you play as an elephant named CJ. He was captured and was going to be brought to a zoo in England, but the plane hits turbulence, and the elephant, CJ, gets knocked out of the airplane. He's able to quickly grab an umbrella on his way down and uses the umbrella as a parachute to float softly down to the ground. And so this game is his mission getting back to Africa and the rest of his elephant pack, which I think is very cute, very noble kind of a game. CJ just wants to get back home. Along the way, you fight a very strange host of enemies, poodles, snails, frogs, spikes. You have an unlimited number of peanuts that you can shoot out of your nose. You can also throw bombs, and you collect cakes, bananas, and soda along the way, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, it's a multi-directional scrolling action game, and it's got 4 levels with a boss fight at the end of each one. You travel through France, Switzerland, Egypt, and then finally Africa. It's even got bonus stages where you can ride bikes and stuff. It's pretty cool. It came out on a lot of different systems: the Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum, the Atari ST, the Amiga, and of course this one on the NES. It was developed by a developer called Genesis, even though it never got released on the Genesis. And the ZX Spectrum was outsourced to a company called Big Red. Allister Brimble did the majority of the composing for the games, except of course Ashley Hogg and Gavin Raeburn teaming up on the NES version. Ashley Hogg also handled the coding for most of the computer games, the Amiga and the Atari ST version, while David Clark created the Commodore 64 version, with Ashley Hogg sticking strictly to the music. So let's hear a track from the Commodore 64 version of the game. This is the original soundtrack that Gavin Raeburn later adapted for the NES. We're going to listen to the bonus stage. This was released on the Commodore 64 1 year earlier than the NES in 1991. Alright, I'm back. That was the bonus stage theme from the Commodore 64 version of CJ's Elephant Antics. I do believe that this was the original version of the game, the soundtrack composed by Ashley Hogg. A short track, but lots of fun. I get kind of maybe like a 50s vibe from it, and it's just a cool little loop. The game itself was really impressive too. Very colorful, very good jumping physics. And when you throw your bomb, it bounces very naturally, and that's, from what I understand, very difficult to do on a Commodore 64, to have kind of a physics emulate real gravity like that. So I was extremely impressed by this one. The soundtrack is fantastic too. There's not a whole lot of music in this game, so the bonus stage was a track that I wanted to pick as opposed to just duplicating the level theme over again. But the level theme on the Commodore 64 is really good too. This one's just got so much arpeggio going on. It's like literally throughout the entire song. Are you guys tired of ARPs yet? If you are, then I am sorry, because there are many more to come as we head through the last third of this show. Speaking of which, let's move on to the next game from composer Gavin Raeburn. We're going to listen to the second stage theme from Stunt Buggies, again released as part of the Quattro arcade series. What a fun and friendly tune. A little more mature, I think, with those leads there. They feel very lyrical, like you could easily do a VGM karaoke to this one. Maybe I'll put that challenge out to you guys, maybe see what you can come up with. This was not only composed by Gavin Raeburn, but the game was coded entirely by Gavin Raeburn as well. And considering it's called Stunt Buggies, perhaps this was Gavin Raeburn's very first vehicle-based game, which culminated in the Forza Horizon series. So maybe this was the prototypical Forza Horizon game. It plays more like Pac-Man, I think, than a racing game. It's a top-down view, and you are driving around this Pac-Man-like maze, gathering up items, trying to avoid the other evil cars and not getting into any accidents. And, each stage has a different map and different kind of graphical theme to it, so maybe more of a prototypical Micro Machines game, which Codemasters were also very famous for. It has that kind of a feel to it, although less racing and more just arcade action kind of stuff. It's a cool one. You should check it out. Next game on our list is the only piece of music I don't have a concrete composer for. There are no credits in this game. Usually most of these games have credits either at the end or the scroll at the title screen or something. It'll say exactly who made it. This one is completely open. Considering that Gavin Raeburn composed or arranged all of the other music on this cartridge, I'm going to, with more certainty than not, credit this song to him. Also because it, sounds like something that he would write. So we're going to listen to the Initials entry theme from F-16 Renegade. Alright, a slightly different feel on this one. That was Initial's entry from F-16 Renegade, released for the NES in 1992, composed by, possibly, Gavin Raeburn. There's a website called the Codemasters Archive, which is kind of the definitive listing of all of Codemasters' releases throughout the years, and even on the page for this game, where they usually have a kind of a detailed list of the people responsible for the game, this one just says coded by Camerica. So whether this was outsourced to Camerica and they just threw it in with all of the Codemasters stuff, I don't know. The music sounds a little bit different than most of Gavin Raeburn's stuff, but still has that same basic formula. You've got the arpeggios in the background, and the lead synth is kind of a more straight-on square channel above it, although this one feels more soaring and heroic. You can tell they were definitely going for Top Gun kind of feeling of flight. The game itself, probably the worst on the cartridge. It alternates between vertical scrolling shoot 'em up and a behind the plane Top Gun style dogfight sequences. There's a 2-player mode as well, where you can cooperate or compete against each other, and most of the levels are pretty much the same. They don't really get much more difficult than the one previous, and the ending is just kind of a black screen with white text saying, "Congratulations, you've renegaded all your F-16s." I'm just kidding. But, you know, nothing to write home about at all. I found this music kind of interesting because it feels so different than the rest of what's on this cartridge. Alright, next up is our last game featured. We've got 2 songs from this game from 2 different systems. This is World 4 from Go Dizzy Go. Not a traditional Dizzy game by any stretch. Still has a decent soundtrack though. Again, composed by Gavin Raeburn. We'll be right back. What a fast, snappy tune. That was World 4 from Go Dizzy Go, composed by Gavin Raeburn. Very different game with a very similar sound, I guess you could say. This one does keep your head nodding quite a bit, though. It's got a very, very distinct beat, and I really enjoy it. This one has a kind of an interesting pedigree in that it came out on the NES and the Game Gear in 1992 as part of the excellent Dizzy collection on the Game Gear, but in reality, the Game Gear version was just a Sega Master System game running in Game Gear mode on the Game Gear. So you could extract the ROM from the Game Gear cartridge and actually play it on a Master System on your TV, which I thought was pretty cool. It's a top-down game. You are playing as Dizzy, who is trying to get all of the snacks. It's basically an offshoot of another game called Quick Snacks, and you need to push blocks into enemies to destroy them and then run around the level and collect all of the fruit or the candy before time is up. So in that respect, it's compared to the Adventures of Lolo by a lot of people. It does feel very much like that game with a few graphical enhancements and maybe like a quicker pace. Obviously, this music is extremely fast, so it's a little bit faster and a little bit more energetic than the Lolo series was. There was a Genesis version of this game actually planned. They were going to release an excellent Dizzy collection cartridge for the Genesis/Mega Drive, but that never released because the Oliver twins left Codemasters around 1994 when the game was supposed to be released. There was also an Aladdin Deck Enhancer version of this game as well, but because that got canceled, they released it on a regular cartridge. In 2020, there was a cartridge for the Evercade called the Oliver Twins Collection, and that included a whole bunch of Dizzy games and a lot of the earlier games that they had written, and so you can get those all on a cartridge and play emulated versions of them on the handheld Evercade player, and I think they are releasing or have recently released a home console version of the Evercade as well. So if you're really into Dizzy or really into the Oliver Twins stuff, you can pick up that game cartridge and play all of their games, which I thought was pretty cool. All right, so the Game Gear version was composed by Lyndon Sharp and has a slightly different version of the soundtrack. So for our last track of the night, we're going to play the Game Gear version of the title theme from Go Dizzy Go. This was released in 1994. Alright, that was the title theme from Go Dizzy Go, the Game Gear version released in 1994, 2 years after the original NES version. This game was composed and the game was coded also by Lyndon Sharp. I love this theme song. I think this is a great way to end the show. I think it embodies a lot of the energy that the music in this show had. But also has kind of its own thing going on. It's not as arpeggiated. There's a little bit here and there. The Game Gear / Sega Master System sound hardware was not as conducive to arpeggios as like the Commodore 64 and the NES were. So it's still fun to hear them on this system. It wasn't used very often since most of those soundtracks were written by Japanese composers who weren't really down with the whole arpeggio thing. Anyways, fast and fun and exuberant. This is a very difficult song to get on the internet. There's no rip of this game anywhere because the game has sound effects over the music, so it's very difficult to record the audio, and I don't think anybody's like hacked the game or anything to get to a point where you can record full tunes. So I had to log a VGM file from a Genesis emulator that was playing this Game Gear game. And I'm glad I did. I really, really like this tune. Lyndon Sharp, newcomer to the show for the very end of our run here. However, he's been in the industry since 1989, writing music for Twin Turbo, V8, and, you know, he worked on a ton of the Codemasters stuff, just like Gavin Raeburn. Worked on some of the ports of CJ's Elephant Antics, worked on the Micro Machines games, the original Quick Snacks game that was the precursor to Go Dizzy Go, Captain Dynamo, The Fantastic Adventures of Dizzy, Dizzy Prince of the Oak Folk, Cosmic Spacehead, which was the alternative title for Linus Spacehead, CJ Elephant Fugitive in 1994, and then Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament in 1996. Did a lot of programming and engineering as well, in inclusion to a lot of the Dizzy games. He also worked on some of the Lego games towards the end of his game career. Lego Racers 2 in 2001 and Jerome Racers in 2002. A couple of Marvel games in there as well. It's funny, if you go to Moby Games and look up his career sheet, you'll see a portrait of him, and he's standing in front of an excellent Dizzy collection poster with the game in his hand and Game Gear in the other hand. So obviously he was pretty proud of what he had done with this excellent Dizzy collection, considering he had his hand in just about everything except for the graphics of the game. I don't blame him. So there's a much larger Codemasters story here than what we've just gone over with these 4 games. It's a really interesting company, and their partnership with Comerica on the hardware side of things was a very good symbiotic relationship. They seem to really understand what each other needed in terms of the hardware and the software portions, so they created some cool stuff. Comerica went out of business in 1994, which is why the Aladdin Deck Enhancer didn't really go anywhere, so Codemasters was kind of left to create their own cartridges. You can still get an Aladdin Game Deck Enhancer. There are actually a lot of sealed boxes out there, but they go for like $200. They come with 1 Dizzy game. Probably not worth it, especially since the EverDrives can play those ROMs without needing any sort of extra enhancers on them. But, you know, maybe we can do a Dizzy show at some point, or if anyone out there has a love for a Codemasters property, I'd love to revisit this, or some other Oliver Twins games. I think that would be a whole lot of fun. Alright guys, so that wraps up our show for today. I'd love to thank Indira J for the art, and Trevin Hughes aka Dread for the podcast theme song. If you would like to be a guest VG ambassador on the show, you can always email me at thevgembassy@gmail.com, or you can visit the VGMbassy.com website, and you'll see a widget on the side of the screen where you can join our Discord, and then you can hang out with us. We can chat, or you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thevgembassy, and certain tiers will get you a free ticket to do a show with me with a topic of your choice. Speaking of which, one thing I like to do at the end of every show is to thank all of my Patreon patrons by name. At our tourist level, we've got Cameron Childs, Nathan Cooper, and the Phantomire. At our VG Emissary tier, Chris Murray, Chris Myers, Chris Steenerson, Mike Stark, aka Ganon11, Jordan Worma from the Table to Stage podcast, Kyle Kroll, The Dyad, and Daryl Bowers, aka The Last Weekend. Our audio attaché members Cameron Worma, Carlito from the Heroes 3 podcast, and Scott McElhone. Our special agents, Ryan Steele and Volt Supreme, and our VG ambassadors, Frankly Zappa and Alex the Messenger from A VGM Journey. Alright guys, so I don't have a concrete plan for next episode. If you guys have any cool suggestions, well, let me know. I do have some plans in the works for a guest spot on some other podcasts, so hopefully you'll be hearing me on those soon. I was just recently on the XVGM Radio April Fool's show, which was a whole lot of fun. Go back and listen to it. You'll hear lots of guest spots from lots of your favorite VGM podcast hosts. So, until next episode, stay safe, keep listening to Awesome VGM. Bye everyone.